So we're just waiting a few moments while everybody joins us, just a few more people coming into the room here. So for those just joining us, we're just waiting a few moments till we get everybody into the room. Okay, I make it 1 minute past, so we'll get going, and if people join us as we go, that's fine too. So welcome, thanks so much for joining us today for our Commonplace Earth Day webinar. Just a few things to begin with, just some housekeeping, as we always like to begin with. So this webinar will be recorded, so it will be accessed online, so you can access it online later on. Your images are not visual if you're in the audience, so don't worry about your faces being seen or anything if you don't want that. Please participate on social media throughout the webinar if you'd like to. Today we're using the hashtag CP Earth Day. We have a Q&A function switched on today, so if you've got questions for our speakers, feel free to post them, and do upvote other questions that you see that you'd like answered, because if there's an overwhelming number, we'll answer the ones at the top with the most upvotes, and again they'll be answered at the end. And of course afterwards the webinar has been recorded, so we'll send you out a recording at the end. So first of all, a huge thanks to James and Lisa for joining us today. It's been really inspiring for us to see the work you've been doing and to work with you both at Low Carbon and the Manchester Climate Agency. I'm really looking forward to hearing some more about the fantastic things you're doing in your communities to make them aware of the changes that are happening in your area and how they can have their say. I wanted to start today just by taking a little time to talk about the term net zero. So what do we really mean when we talk about net zero? It's about balancing greenhouse gases that we're producing and emitting into the atmosphere with those that we're removing, so we have that net zero effect. Now, last December, the government's Climate Change Committee published their 6th carbon budget report. And in it, they highlighted that the UK, that in order for the UK to reach its net zero target by 2050, we need to achieve a 78% reduction in emissions by 2035. The chart you can see on the slide shows the UK, so it shows the UK's progress on its existing carbon budget. Now, as indicated by the blue line, current projections show that the UK is not on track to achieving its required net zero journey set out by the Climate Change Committee. Now, the path set by the CCC is one that they call a balanced pathway, which, as the name suggests, is a scenario in which the balance of measures that help us achieve, in which we get to a balanced measure to help us achieve that net zero target. Now, certainly achieving the objectives will be a significant undertaking and require widespread behavioural change and a rapid deployment of emissions removal technologies. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, unsurprisingly, in the report, the emissions reduced need to occur in every sector of the economy. And if you have a look at the graph labelled 1, you'll see that the extent of which the different industries need to reduce their emissions differ. And if you look on the graph on the right, you'll see that obviously some sectors require more attention than others. So, for example, the purple bar, that relates to surface transport. So we're excluding aviation and shipping, just surface transport. Now, incidentally, a lot of the work that we've been doing with our customers over the past 12 months here at Commonplace has revolved around active travel consultations. And over the past year, we've worked with 66 local authorities to help coordinate their active travel strategies. However, whilst this is clearly the most significant change that needs to be made, it's important that we're also ensuring that we do our part across a range of other sectors too, so we can hit those net zero targets. Now, for me, one of the key points picked out by the 6th carbon budget is that changes don't just need to be made at an industrial or political level. It's not just industries and politicians and businesses that will get us there. We have to work collectively, and as individuals, we have an important role to play. So to date, much of the success in reducing the UK's carbon emissions has been more or less invisible to the public, and hasn't required mass engagement, or hasn't used mass engagement. So for example, low carbon power now provides over 50% of the UK's electrical supply, thanks to measures put in place in policy making. But moving forward, reaching net zero will require more involvement from people, every one of us, changes in behaviour and making smarter consumer choices. Now in this pie chart, and this is taken from the carbon budget, in order to achieve this balanced pathway that we referred to, the government has laid out how it expects this to be delivered. The large green segment, this is something that requires policy, investment and incentives by governments to spark action by business and local authorities to change. While these decisions may seem like they're out of our control as individuals, through engagement, we do have the opportunity to provoke this change in the decision makers, whether this be through pushing policy for things like local infrastructure, so electric charging points, or financial change, like encouraging our local authorities to divest from fossil fuels. It's important that where communities, it's important here for communities to have this collaboration and be part of this change. What's interesting is when we look at the grey segment, over 40% of the proposed reductions, according to the balanced pathway, involve a degree of change from consumers. So for example, driving an electric car or installing solar panels on your home. And finally, the 16%, these are measures in the balanced pathway scenario that require consumer choices to both reduce demand and improve sufficiency. So these would be things like us opting to eat a healthier, cleaner diet, reducing aviation travel, and replacing our regular driving with active travel such as walking or cycling. Now, for me, this is incredibly important. So according to the Climate Change Committee, it will not be possible to get close to meeting a net zero target without engaging with people or by pursuing an approach that focuses only on supply side changes. So if this is a behavioural change issue, what's needed are conversations to help inform the changes that support our net zero targets. This is something that's underway both nationally and locally by some of our more ambitious councils in the form of a citizens' assembly. A citizens' assembly brings together an independently selected and diverse group of people representative of the wider community, and they learn, discuss and debate, and ultimately they make recommendations, in this case, on how repairing climate damage should be carried out in their particular area. While citizens' assemblies are hugely meaningful and a really effective process, beyond that, more can be done, with engagements that reach all corners of our community, opening up cooperative conversations, sharing knowledge and insight, and ultimately building trust by giving every single person an opportunity to have their say and get involved. In order to provoke these changes in behaviour at a community level, we need to embrace openness, create a shared understanding of the needs of people in a way that can really drive positive change. Now, I've talked quite a lot so far about what Commonplace is doing and our theory of change and how we're working towards climate action, but we've got some really great speakers. So first up, I'd like to introduce James Hartley-Bond from Low Carbon. James is the head of project development for UK Solar and Storage. And we've been working with him and his team over the past 12 months, helping them to engage with rural communities in the development of new solar farms across the UK. Since the beginning of 2020, we've launched 13 different engagement sites with them and have a further 5 in the pipeline over the coming months. By improving this transparency and openness with communities that they're working with, they've successfully been able to develop and rapidly grow as a business and help decarbonise the UK's energy supply. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Rosa, and yeah, thank you for having us today. Yeah, look, just such a big topic. And both in terms of the things you were talking about, but and also the kind of things I could talk about with low carbon today. I'll just share my slides. But look, I am time limited. There's probably a number of things we can get into during the course of the discussions as well. Hopefully some of that will be sort of teased out later. Is that displaying correctly there, Rosa?
Looks good, James. Yep.
Wonderful. So but look, really, I was going to just sort of introduce low carbon, talk about a bit about what we do, talk about the wider context for what we do, and then really just touch on probably using a case study that Rosa was perhaps alluding to, just our experience of better engagement, particularly in the difficult times we've all found ourselves in. So just leaving that slide there for a second, because it's probably a good clue as to what we do. For those on the listening in today, we're basically involved in all aspects of renewable energy development, mainly within the UK and Europe, but we do have some interests further afield as well. Hopefully most people are familiar certainly with wind turbines, and will have seen a number of solar farms perhaps around. The other image in the center there is sort of battery storage technology, which is something we're also at the forefront of developing, whether that's standalone or integrated with other technologies as well. So just a bit more about low carbon. So we've been around for about 10 years now. We are a British owned and investment and asset management company, but we also carry out development as part of our core business. We've been pretty successful in doing that, having developed around about 450 megawatts of solar farm projects in the UK. But alongside that, we also manage, and by manage I mean both looking after the asset management of various solar farms for the likes of pension funds, where our money, all of our money is increasingly invested, and various investment funds as well. And we actually look after about 1 in 5 of all of the solar farms you might see driving up and down the country. That's a core part of our business. The solar farms that we have developed, however, to give you kind of some figures and an idea as to how much clean energy that really relates to, we've now developed enough projects to power almost 150,000 houses, which is also the equivalent of taking over 110,000 tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere, or the equivalent of taking over 51,000 cars off the road. So something we're incredibly proud of as a company. Another thing we're incredibly proud of is we are a certified B Corporation. It's an accreditation, it's an international accreditation, but we are one of only a few hundred companies in the UK, and I think just over 3,000 globally with this accreditation. And really it's measuring, and its kind of stated aims is businesses that have profit with purpose, and it's really important to what we do. And certainly going back to the beginning of the journey with low carbon, the founders of the company 10 years or so ago were really just trying to accelerate the shift that we are seeing a lot more of now in decarbonising society. And we may touch on this elsewhere, we're also trying to do that in a way which is not simply about generating renewable energy, but is doing it with biodiversity in mind and with working with communities at the heart of it. So I'm sure we'll touch more on that. Rosa's presentation was really interesting, and I'm sure many of you, like me, find that there's almost daily announcements in this area now, and we find that really, really important and really welcome. But really, just to provide a bit of context or additional context to build on what Rosa was saying, we have a legally binding target now as a country. The government committed to reaching net zero by 2050. And as recently as this week, building on what Rose was saying about the 6th carbon budget, there is now well, what I'll refer to as a waymarker on that journey to 2050, because it's massively important to not just simply sit back now and hope and think that we'll get there miraculously by 2050. A lot of people have referred to the 2020s as the decade of needing a significant shift, and we have 10 years to save the world, but it's a real significant statement by the government to announce that they wish to see a 78% reduction in emissions based on the 1990 levels by 2035. And then just kindly, courtesy to Regen Southwest, they were looking at some scenario planning for what this could mean. A couple of graphs there. The one on the right hand side is the uptake of heat pumps in residential properties, but perhaps more significant for the industry I'm involved in. Where we are at the moment is around about 87 terawatt hours of solar power being generated a year, and really by 2035 that means nearly tripling what we have installed, that whether that's in fields or on rooftops, all of the solar that you see at the moment, and then ultimately by 2050 is more than 5 times current levels. So there are other technologies in there, on and offshore wind, and other measures as well, but I think it shows just the scale of the challenge that we have and why we need to be making these efforts now. And then really I was going to just turn to a case study. So I sort of think back, as I'm sure many of you do, to really the start of the pandemic. We had just developed 3 projects we had planning consent around about just before the pandemic really kicked off. And we were about to launch into a series of other projects of consultation that were sort of nearing a point of being able to go public. And as I'm sure is familiar to many people listening, our big quandaries then were, our projects are based on a series of technical studies, but a huge part of what we do is also based on the engagement aspect. And it was, at that time, there was a real fear for, could we continue to do things? Is it appropriate? And I think once we got over, realizing this wasn't going to be just a temporary blip, and we were in this for the long haul, there was a movement towards, look, we have to keep going, but how do we do that? And there was a lot of consternation, and we looked at all sorts of ways of continuing to engage with communities. And for us, a big part of that was looking at online digital platforms to see how we might continue. And really, that's where we discovered Commonplace, and we've been really, really pleased with what we've found, because it's allowed us to kind of continue this discussion and to keep communities engaged. And I'll sort of share some experience of this in the coming slides. But I think it's important to note in amongst this that can't be at the cost of whatever we could do to continue to correspond with those harder to reach groups, and not excluding people. So whilst we now run, as Rosa was saying, with 13 projects that have already gone through this process, this was then supported by mail shots to local residents that might be affected by the proposal, with paper feedback forms. We have a free post address for people to return their comments, and then we ran things in local newspapers. We had a free phone number if people wish to get in contact with us, project email address for each project we were developing. And again, as I'm sure many people are familiar with now, again, ran a series of webinars, Teams calls, Zoom calls, any number of things to just continue that engagement. And the image on the right hand side that you can see there is for the project that was really our first project going that we brought forward through the pandemic. And I'll kind of continue on that theme. So the image on the left hand side, really, I quite like this image. There's a number of things I quite like about it, but just starting with the sheer number of comments and visitors. One thing, again, many people may have been in the same position, certainly as an industry, and we're probably as guilty as anyone historically. The traditional approach to consultation was a certain amount of notification, things in the press, and then the sort of go and stand in a village hall, where typically 20 people may turn up, most of which have come because they're a bit curious about the proposal, or they've really just come to object. And certainly historically, we tended to find that most consultations we ran, you got those kind of typical responses. The people that really felt they should engage to state their objection to something was typically what came back. Very few in support of proposals. And it was also quite difficult to get a feel for, is there a silent majority, and what does that silent majority think? And the first thing I noticed from looking at that slide right in the very top left-hand corner was, and granted this proposal was closer than a lot of ours to a sort of significant community, but we had 2,988 visitors to the website, which is, for us, is phenomenal. We still haven't beaten it, but it also then tracks how many people looked at a series of pages and ultimately went through with commenting on the proposal. I'll show that on the next slide. You'll kind of see a bit of the feedback. But the other thing I was going to touch on, because we were aware there was a significant community by the project, we also decided to take up Commonplace, have another service where they can run a social media campaign to really push the message that these consultations are ongoing. And we felt that, especially as this was the start of the pandemic and there was a large community here, we really sort of saw that that could have benefits in just getting this message out there. I really like the graph at the bottom, because the sort of, there's a lot of bumping around the bottom with the odd hit. And you may not be able to see that in that scale entirely, but it's sort of probably around 10 people a day for the first 10 days or so of the consultation. And then at that point, we launched a social media campaign, and suddenly the hit rate was going into the hundreds, so almost as high as 400. And I think it just shows the power of social media, as we largely suspected, as being something which really helps to get this message out there. And then really just wanted to touch on the findings. So we suspected that that there could well be some opposition to the proposal, just because of it's not one of our more remote projects. But based on what I was saying, historically, we certainly saw or tended to see that most people that were responding were somewhere between fairly against proposals to maybe slightly neutral, and it's really hard to capture those people that maybe are slightly more positive towards a proposal. And I'm sure that we can maybe talk about some suspicions as to why that's the case. Certainly from our point of view, I think the ease of which it is to be able to just click onto a website, find out a little bit of information about something, answer a few questions without that conscious effort to have to go and drive to a village hall and at the right time for you, and the hassle factor, I think, made it easier for people with a positive view that weren't as inclined to go out and go to that event, would actually go on the website and provide a response. So whilst the image there is skewed more negative to positive, we took a lot of encouragement from this, that there was actually a significant, there was a significant response, and it is mixed. So that was kind of the key finding one, is that overall we found, and we found this has continued to be the case, is that there's just far greater engagement. We do still encounter the odd criticism, and others may have found the same, that people think that it's inappropriate to do this during a pandemic, and that we must go and stand in a village hall. But certainly our argument back to that is engagement has gone up. Now, that's not to say that we won't return in some way to that, and I think it's important we do. But what we have learned through this process is, and I don't see this changing, is every project we now develop comes with a website such as this to provide that information to the community, and to really try and capture those comments. So anyone who's not using it and is interested, certainly our experiences, it's been very, very worthwhile. And really, I won't take too much longer, but the story for us comes with a happy ending, and curiously, the timing's interesting, because although this application itself had taken quite a long time in planning, we actually received a planning consent earlier this week. It was a virtual planning committee. And again, just building on this kind of overall feeling of, I think, people's awareness of what's happening at the moment with climate change, it was a unanimously approved application by a vote of 13-0. So, you know, whether the consultation has helped with that or whether it's a sign of the times, you know, be interested in picking up on that. But yeah, that's really it. There's probably an opportunity to ask a few questions now, and again, probably at the end. So I'll stop sharing and just see if anything comes in.
Thanks, James. It's really interesting. I'm based rurally, although Commonplace is generally based in London. I'm based rurally myself, and I'm always really keen to hear what's going on in rural areas, because we do find, I think, a lot of the focus, particularly around climate change, is focused on our cities and our higher population areas. So it's really nice to see the work you're doing. I wonder, James, if you would talk a little about how you're protecting the sort of the vistas, I suppose, within the countryside. I know you've got some really interesting sliders that show the before and after. I wonder if you just talk through that quickly.
Yeah, so look, it's a really good point. I was sort of conscious of how much time I had and how much we could go into, but yeah, look, one of the things that we do choose to feature on the platforms we run is, again, people may be familiar with the concept, but essentially before and after views. So we will have certain images taken of the site from certain angles, and then we will have a rendered image, an artist impression, made up for what the solar farm could look like in that viewpoint. We sometimes have it at day one after construction, or ultimately a number of years on, where things like vegetation that we might put around them has matured. And what's really quite impressive on the platform is as you're mentioning there, Rosa, is the ability to have a slider which you can literally scan across the image backwards and forwards, which shows the before and after. And I think that's been something that really helps to visually capture or people to imagine what these developments look like. But yeah, happy to talk more at length about that as well.
Wonderful, thanks, James. I wonder if I know we've got Fred working behind the scenes here. I wonder if Fred could post a link to that in the chat, or maybe we can send it out afterwards. They're brilliant sliders. They're our sliders generally show a before and after of a big development of things, and it's quite a big change. But to use a slider and see very little change at all is really interesting in this situation. So thanks, James. We've got some questions coming in, and we'll hang on to those till the end. So do put some more questions in the Q&A function if you've got some. But I'd like to move on next to, let me share my screen again for you. I'd like to move on to our next speaker. I want to introduce Lisa. Lisa Lingard is from the Manchester Climate Change Agency, and Lisa has over 20 years experience in managing and delivering climate change and environmentally sustainability projects in Manchester. This includes project managing climate change adaptations and mitigation action plans with business and other organisations. With an environmental studies degree and numerous postgraduate qualifications, Lisa worked for over a decade for the Manchester City Council as a principal project officer in the environmental strategies team, and is now the community and resident lead at the Manchester Climate Change Agency. So Lisa, over to you. I'm sure you've got lots to say, and we very much enjoy working with you.
Thanks very much, Rosa. Yes, so I'm from Manchester Climate Change Agency. We're a community interest company set up in 2015 to champion climate change across the city. And we're arm's length from the council, so we're governed by a partnership that represents 10 different sectors, including both of the universities in Manchester. We have Manchester City Football Club, we have our faith communities are involved in our climate change action plans, and companies such as Electricity Northwest, our our social landlords also sit on that group. So they represent some of the major organisations and stakeholders across the city. So I'm going to share my screen now. Just checking you can see that.
We can see that, Lisa, looks great.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to talk about Manchester's plans to be net zero carbon by 2038, and really what that means for the city going forward and what it means for our residents and communities as well. So as Rosa said, I'm resident and communities lead, so I'm leading on a programme, it's a pilot programme working with 6 communities, very diverse communities across the city, to encourage climate action. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what's been happening in Manchester on our journey to net zero. And basically, we've been working in this field for 12 years. So we started around 2009 when we published our first call to action. And then we set up a group to develop led by the City Council at the time, to develop a collective action plan for the whole city, which was called Manchester, A Certain Future, which was published in 2009. And that was the first time that we worked with the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, based at the University of Manchester, on a science-based carbon reduction plan. And our first plan, which was based on 2005 levels, was to get the city to a 41% reduction in our carbon emissions by 2020. We did achieve that, and there were 2 aims to that strategy up to 2020. One was direct carbon emissions, and the second was really about fostering culture change, what we call in Manchester carbon literacy. So the carbon literacy programme was kind of founded on the back of this Manchester A Certain Future programme, and that carbon literacy programme works with organisations and residents to get them to a level of understanding about climate change. And so you can see from the graph, there was our pathway, 41% reduction by 2020. And when we looked at how we were doing, when we delved into those reductions, quite a lot of that reduction, certainly in terms of our energy, was caused by decarbonisation at the grid level. So the UK government switching from very intense carbon coal-powered fire stations to renewables and other sources of energy generation. So we had a look back at, so we went back to the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research, and we said, okay, now that the Paris Agreement is in place in 2016, what does that mean for Manchester? If we want to get to play our full part in the Paris Agreement, what does the city need to do? And the Tyndall Centre came up with a carbon budget approach, so very much a science-based carbon budget approach. And our carbon budget is 50 million tonnes, and the date by which they said we had to get to zero was 2038. And you can see in the graph on the left there that that budget is sectioned into 5-year chunks. And the chunk that we're in at the moment, 2020 to 2025, means that we've got a massive 50% reduction in our direct emissions. And when we've looked at our data, the best that we've done on an annual basis is up to 4 to 5% per year. So to switch to a massive 50% over the next 5 years, which equals about 13% year on year, is really, really challenging. So we started to look at how we could work with all our communities across the city, as well as our businesses and third sector organisations. So we've got our kind of top-down zero carbon Manchester plan, and we're working on an implementation plan for that this year. But what does the message mean for an average resident who lives and works in Manchester? Well, our message to communities is really to work together. So, you know, we're going to support and empower our communities to take action to reduce their carbon emissions. But at the same time, we understand that the city has, and the city and the local communities have their own priorities. So we want to work with our communities to make sure that the priorities that we're working on together are the same and that they work simultaneously together. So we were lucky enough that we've got some development funding from the National Lottery's Climate Action Fund for a year, and that's the programme that we're just about to launch next month, Zero Carbon Communities Programme. So what does that mean for our residents? Well, it's really about giving them the support and the tools and the engagement to be able to get involved, understand what it is that they need to do in their daily lives to really get to our 50% reduction. There are obviously lots of actions that organisations such as the City Council, such as Transport for Greater Manchester, such as the energy companies, registered social landlords will also have to do at the same time to make that journey easier. So, for example, that might be making sure that we're decarbonising our energy generation, making sure that our homes are well insulated, that our transport strategies include renewable energy where possible, and active travel, so getting people out of their cars. But what we really want to do with this programme is have a very bottom-up approach. So put our communities at the heart of what the action that we're developing with them. So it's very much a co-creating programme. And part of that is also going to be a little bit of science. So we have the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research in our partnership, and they'll be working with our communities to develop community action plans from the bottom up. So saying to our communities, these are the type of things that we think will make an impact on the city's carbon emissions reduction profile. Which of those would you like to get involved with? Which of those would work for you, and will work with you to develop those easy wins as we work through our 5-year programme, becoming more ambitious as we go through the programme and really beginning to get a movement of action and motivation across the city. We have an environmental charity called Hubbub, who are working on our communications campaign, and I'll get onto that later. And really from the outset, we knew that we wanted to have a community engagement online portal. And obviously Commonplace is really, really great in terms of providing that positive, participatory and dynamic engagement. And that's been really, really beneficial, obviously, as we've moved through the pandemic over the past 2 years in planning this project. We do want to have face-to-face and community projects in our areas as we go along, but it's really meant that we can have a hub and a repository where we can put all our materials on and start to engage people at a really local level. We've also got in our programme a capacity building support programme, so a training programme that will support our residents to build leadership and really understand the benefits of what we're doing. And really major part of this is working with those strategic organisations such as Greater Manchester Combined Authority and the local authority to say that these are the issues that people are having on an everyday basis, that we really need to think through how we can shift those barriers and do more at scale. So we've got a community board, so in our Nature Community Board, which is really about putting the community at the heart of the programme. And then we've got a number of different areas of work that we're all working together on the programme. I'll skip to the next one. So this is quite a good example actually of the whole programme. So we will have the climate change, climate action plans being developed in our neighbourhoods, and that will be a cooperation of citizens, communities and residents. So that's the U bit there, but also the government, so our local government representatives, our local councillors and our ward representatives, and also businesses and stakeholders. And what we'll do together is think about, in terms of where we need to get to over the next 5 years, who needs to do what. So if you think about Rosa's first slide about that 43%, which is about actions that have to be done by strategic organisations that will lead to logistical emissions reductions. What do we need to support our residents who perhaps have less agency to be responsible for emissions? What do we need to do to support them? So that's very much about unlocking barriers at the top level while supporting people at the community level to say what they want to do and what they want to happen in their community. So just very briefly, it's a pilot project for a year, and we've got 6 communities across Manchester, and we've very much gone for not the usual suspects. So in Manchester, the green leafy subjects, suburbs towards the south of the city, we've actually looked at where there might be more challenges. You know, so we've got places like Levenshulme and Moss Side and Hume, which have got issues with air pollution near major aerial and transport arteries, and other places such as the Northern Quarter Action Group, which is right in the middle of the city centre, and other areas towards the north of the city, which are represent really high areas of deprivation as well. So we've not gone for the usual suspects. So what does it look like if you're a resident? So our campaign is called In Our Nature, and it kind of builds upon the Manchester character, if you like. So, you know, we were the city that brought the Industrial Revolution, you know, with the cotton industry. And what we're saying here is we're spinning that on its head. You know, it's in our nature to do more. It's in our nature to really act on climate change. And the other part of this In Our Nature project is about reconnecting people in urban areas to nature. So a lot of what we found over the last 12 to 18 months is that people want to get out into nature, and they want to be connected, and they want to have that that space and that area. And obviously, being in an urban area, you can't always have access. So this is about bringing greener spaces to residents and really fostering that kind of grow your own at home, or grow, or, you know, regrow a little grot spot at the end of your street, and start to have that conversation about greenery and wildlife that then builds into conversations over the 5 years about different things that you can do in your lifestyle to combat climate change. So we've used our commonplace as a place to put all of this, and so over time we'll build up this programme. And what I really love here is the stories we love. So we've got a creative content producer that's going to go out and discover all the amazing things that are happening, do films and bring those stories to life on our commonplace. We've also got links to social media such as Instagram and Twitter and all the usual social media slides. So here's some examples about our print messaging that will also be up across the city on our billboards. And part of what we're doing is really making it easy and natural for people to get involved. So we've got loads of tips and advice that sit on our commonplace and make it really easy for people to think about, okay, well, what can I do in my daily lives? And those tips and advice are also focused on the 5 areas of our implementation plan. So energy in the home, transportation, getting people to be more active in their travel, things we buy, you know, food, fashion, biodiversity and wildlife, and really where you're spending your money as well. And part of this is also about practical action. So we've got a number of projects that are already going to take part and are really about having a conversation with people to say, okay, if you get interested in greenery and wildlife, does that also springboard, or can that springboard into deeper conversations and more inclusive conversations with residents about climate action? And that's part of, for example, this nature takeover that we're doing in a couple of areas across the city. It's about, if we bring nature to people, can they then engage with it? And then can we use that as an opportunity to talk about climate change? So go and look at our commonplace. Freddie, if you could put that link up in the chat, that would be great. So at the moment, as I said, we are not launching until the 10th of May. So we haven't got all the details up there that we're going to have after that time, but we will have our tips for change. And in my local communities, all our local communities will have a heat map. And so people will be able to come and post their own stories, and they'll be able to talk about all the great things that are happening in their areas across Manchester as well. And that was my last slide. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Lisa. It's always fascinating to hear what's going on, particularly in Manchester, and then more specifically with your organisation. I wonder if I can ask a question about one of the things that I love hearing you talk about is really the focus on engaging the community and how their voice and getting them involved is so important to everything that happens. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about behavioural changes that you see coming out of that, and how that's sort of responded to.
Yeah, sure. So it's really interesting, I think, because lockdown has seen many different changes in people's behaviour, and especially that need, if you like, to get out into the community. I think we're really beginning to see with spring people wanting to start to get out again and mix, and I think that's where our messaging, you know, in our nature can really bring that to life. So it's about people having a respect for the environment and where they live, and once people have that, you know, you can foster that respect for the environment, you can start to think about other conversations, more harder conversations about, you know, well, have you thought about you know, not driving to the shops, and have you thought, you know, think about air quality in your local area, you know, can you think about walking the kids to school rather than driving to the school? And people start to connect then on a deeper level, and so that's one of the areas that we've been really pleased with.
Thanks, Lisa. It's always so fascinating to hear. But I'm just going to share my screen again here. Hopefully you can see that now. And I want to talk a little bit, just very quickly, about something else we're doing at Commonplace. So at Commonplace, our focus is on connecting people to the places that they work, live and play, and bringing them into bringing their involvement into key decisions that affect their community. So last year, as we went into lockdown, we didn't want that mission statement to just be something that was written on our About Us page. So that's why we offered some areas of our platform for free to organisations who were trying to engage their communities and coordinate their response to the pandemic. Many councils ended up using our platform to help organise their active travel planning and ensure that people could cycle, walk and socially distance safely in their local area. So following on from this success, we want to help organisations again by similarly offering a free community heat map for you to use to coordinate your climate action plans, to crowdsource ideas on how to tackle the climate crisis with your community in your area. So what you can see here is we've built a templated map-based engagement with a focus on the key topics from the Friends of the Earth climate action plans for councils. Our heat map can not only help build a local picture, but also feed into international data to help the understanding of the level of willingness and the priorities that communities are holding in tackling the climate crisis, particularly in the run-up to COP26. If you're interested in using one of our heat maps, I believe Fred's going to pop up a poll, and feel free to fill that in, and one of our engagement experts can reach out and get in touch with you. I think you've heard a lot from me. So what I'd like to do is, just in the 10 minutes we've got left, there's been some brilliant questions, and we'll go through and have a look at those. If I can just stop sharing here. Fantastic. Let's have a look. So James and Lisa, we've had some really great questions which I'll put to you. So one of the ones that's been upvoted the most, this is from Isaac. How will the bottom-up approach work in Manchester Climate Action Agency, and will it involve participatory budgeting? Lisa, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, sure. So we haven't got participatory budgeting at the moment, but it's something that we're open to for this project. We have, however, got a community fund available, and we've got project funding available as well for our 6 communities. So there are 2 different pots basically. One is a pot of money that communities will be able to bid into, and they will be able to spend that money the way they like, so mini participatory budgeting if you want. And the other is a pot of money that they will be able to use for different climate change activities.
Thank you, wonderful. And then just so we can get through as many of these as we can, James, there's a question from Brett. He says he'd be interested to hear more about the social media campaign and how you targeted the community you mentioned, which lived nearby. And then actually, whilst you're answering this one, James, would you also talk a little bit about the worry about glare from solar panels? I know that's a question that's come up a couple of times too.
Of course, yeah. So and I think probably was another one there about where was the site. So which I'll kind of touch on. It's all kind of linked really. So the site is a place called sort of between Inkersall and Staveley, which is on the outskirts of Chesterfield in Derbyshire. So it's sort of urban fringe in the sense that it is in fields and farmland, but it's on the edge of essentially an urban area. The glint and glare, sort of the aspects for that, look, is a question we get asked quite a lot. It's fairly standard practice to submit something called a glint and glare assessment as part of our projects. In some respects, if a solar panel is reflecting, it's not really doing its job. The intention there really is to attract and keep as much of the energy hitting it within the panel itself. And the efficiencies of panels has risen massively over the last few years and will continue to do so. But they're also treated these days with anti-reflective coating, and the same with the framework. So there may be some instances of I haven't seen it very often myself, but there are some, particularly on rooftops, depending on the panel and depending on the age. Occasionally I have seen some issues perhaps with glare, but I'd say the vast majority of the time I don't tend to see it from all of the sites that we operate or drive around. And then just really on the second point, yeah, the social media. Look, it was we asked a lot of questions when we were kicking this off. You know, had the help of the team at Commonplace to identify how best to do it. I think there's a number of options open to people as to how they wish to go about using it. What I will say is, yes, we managed to really pinpoint on a postcode basis to the communities we were looking to capture, and then it's a case of through what platforms, what forums. Each of those comes with its own additional cost, and those costs vary quite wildly, is my understanding. We tended to use Facebook, Google, and whether we chose to use it, I know it was shared a number of times on Instagram. I can't recall whether that was us intentionally using it or it was a consequence of other people resharing via different platforms. So that's, you know, again, it's probably a technical point. Rosa, you may know better than I on that point, how that works. But our choice was really, for us, was Facebook and Google largely on that one. And as to the cost, I'm not quite sure it's a one size fits all, but in the context of the project, we found it relatively modest.
Fantastic. Thanks, James. And if anybody wants any more information about our social media, we're very fortunate to have a social media expert within our team, and can help with social media on all of our projects. So we'll be happy to discuss that further if you want to reach out to us separate from the webinar. This is a really good point made here that I wonder if you'd both respond to. This is from Polly, and they say, we use the language consumer consistently in these presentations. What might it look like if we were referred to people as citizens, to allow people to feel their power and agency as individuals to make changes happen? Consumer tends to shut this off and only give people a role to consume or buy ethical. And we know that this is not the answer. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. It's a really interesting one.
Sure. Lisa, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, we do refer to citizens, you know, but they're people who live and work in Manchester. They're our communities and residents, and they really have the power and agency to make the changes in their own lives. But at the same time, they're looking and they need other organisations to make the changes that will support them to do those actions. But I guess from a consumer point of view, yeah, consumerism, it's still quite negative, I think. And maybe if we did switch it round to being, you know, more about citizen empowerment in our buying choices, then that would make it more of less about buying and more about making it more about the choice. A, if you have to buy. B, can you find it a different way? You know, and thinking about you know, what the ask back to the manufacturers is, well, if I do buy this, can you recycle my old product, for example?
I'd just probably add to that. So look, I think it's a really interesting point. I quite like the term citizen, and I think it's more inclusive and kind of it does, I think, everything you're suggesting it should do. We tend to, just because of the nature of what we do, I guess specifically, we tend to think of people as stakeholders. But what I would say is that as a company, we're kind of at the forefront of really trying to bring communities on the journey with us. So of course we're a private and commercial organisation, but I don't have time to talk about it at length now, but we have just co-developed with a social enterprise what will be, it's going to start construction very, very shortly, and we're helping them with this, but it will be the UK's largest community-owned solar farm. So again, it's another first for us, and certainly making it the UK's largest that we're really proud of. We'd really like to see this kind of thing replicated up and down the country, because I think it's the most important way of getting communities involved in projects. It's less about doing something to a community that way and bringing the community along the journey with us. And the social enterprise that's involved in the ownership of that project is looking to therefore take the revenue and recycle that back into community initiatives, and I guess just keep building awareness. So you know, if we could do that everywhere, we'd dearly love to do it.
Thanks, James. Thanks, Lisa. Really thought-provoking and great question and great point raised. Polly, thanks so much for that. We're spot on 12 o'clock, and I promised our speakers we would finish on time, as they've got other things to go on to. But thanks so much for joining us today, and special thanks again to James and Lisa, and for all the work you've been doing within your organisations. As I mentioned, do get in touch with us if you're interested in using one of our free climate heat maps in your area with your local authority, and do follow us on our social media, and come and join some more of our webinars in the future. Thanks very much, and goodbye. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.